My brother looked me in the eye at our father's funeral and said, "You were always the one he wished he'd never had." He said it quietly, like he was telling me the weather. Like it was just a fact he'd been carrying around for years and finally got tired of holding. I didn't cry, I didn't say anything. I just looked at the flower arrangements my sister in law had picked, white lilies, Dad's least favorite, and I thought, he planned this, all of it. My name is Callie. I'm 31 years old, and for the better part of 3 years, my older brother Devon systematically dismantled every piece of my life while I stood there thinking I was just having a run of bad luck. I want to tell you what he did. All of it? Because I spent a long time being ashamed, like somehow I should have seen it coming, like loving your family is a character flaw. It isn't. But trusting the wrong people with the wrong documents absolutely is, and I paid for that with almost everything I had. My father Raymond was a contractor. He built houses for 40 years in the same county in western Pennsylvania, and by the time he retired, he'd managed to save just over $800,000. His house, his savings, and a small rental property 2 towns over that he'd held on to since the 90s. That was his whole life in numbers. In person, he was the kind of man who kept a spare key under a ceramic frog on the porch and remembered every neighbor's birthday without writing it down. He had a mild stroke when I was 28. Nothing catastrophic. He recovered most of his speech, kept his mobility, but it scared him badly enough that he started talking about estate planning for the first time. He called me one Sunday and said, "Kali, I need to get my affairs in order, and I want you involved." I drove down that same weekend. Devon was already there when I arrived. That should have been my first sign. Devon lived 40 minutes from Dad's house and almost never visited without a specific reason. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a pen, and he'd already made a list. I remember thinking that was sweet, that he was being organized on Dad's behalf. I was 28 and I still thought the best of people. The estate attorney my father hired was someone Devon recommended. A man named Gerald Fitch, whose office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax prep place. Dad liked him because he was straightforward and didn't charge as much as the bigger firms. I had no reason to object. I'd never hired a lawyer in my life. Over the next few months, Dad and Devon and Gerald Fitch had several meetings that I wasn't always invited to. Devon said I didn't need to be there for the preliminary stuff, that he'd fill me in. Dad seemed fine with it. He trusted Devon the way you trust the person who was always the responsible one, the one who got good grades and remembered to call and never asked for anything, at least not obviously. I was the younger one, the one who took 3 years to finish a 2-year nursing program because I kept second-guessing myself, the one who'd moved to Pittsburgh and then back home and then to Pittsburgh again. In our family's accounting of things, Devon was the steady one and I was the one still figuring it out. I didn't know that story was being used against me until much later. Dad's will, as I understood it, was simple. The house would go to both of us equally, the rental property to me specifically because Dad knew I'd been struggling financially and he wanted to give me something stable, and the savings split down the middle. He told me this himself, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the same way he told me everything. No drama, just information. The rental brings in about $1,400 a month, he said. That'll give you a cushion while you get your feet under you. I remember feeling overwhelmed in the best possible way. Not because of the money, but because he saw me. Because he knew I was struggling and he'd thought about it and he'd made a decision to help. I called my best friend that night and cried a little and said my dad was the best person I knew. He died 14 months later. It wasn't sudden, his heart had been weakening since the stroke, but it still felt sudden, the way death always does. You know it's coming, and then it comes, and the knowing doesn't help at all. Devon handled the arrangements. He said I was too emotional, which was probably true, and that he'd take care of everything, which I let him do because grief does something to your ability to argue. You just go along. You just nod. The lilies were wrong, but I didn't say so. The first week after the funeral, Devon told me there had been some changes to the estate. He said it the same way he said everything. Calm, a little tired, slightly burdened. He said Dad had updated the will about 8 months before he died. He said Gerald Fitch had the documents and that everything was in order and that I should come by the attorney's office on Thursday to go over the details. I went on Thursday. The will Devon handed me, the one Gerald Fitch presented with a paperclip in no particular urgency, left me the savings account, about $47,000. The house went entirely to Devon. The rented property went entirely to Devon. The reasoning, according to the document, was that Devon had been contributing to the upkeep and management of both properties for the past 2 years, and it was only fair that his investment be recognized. I sat in that office and read the same paragraph 4 times. Then I looked up at Devon and said, "Dad told me something different." Devon looked at me with an expression I can only describe as practiced patience. "Dad told you a lot of things, Callie. He changed his mind. He was allowed to do that." Gerald Fitch cleared his throat and said that the document was properly witnessed and notarized, and that he'd be happy to answer any procedural questions I had. I didn't have procedural questions. I had the particular sickening feeling of a floor dropping out from under me. I took the $47,000. I signed where they told me to sign, and I drove home to Pittsburgh in a kind of blank shock, thinking I must have misunderstood my father. That maybe Devon was right, that maybe I'd heard what I wanted to hear. I spent 3 months believing that. It was a former colleague of mine, a nurse named Adrienne who'd moved to estate law after burning out on hospital work, who first said the thing I'd been afraid to think. We were having lunch, and I was telling her about the will, and I said something like, "I don't know, maybe he just changed his mind." And she put her fork down and said, "Callie, do you have a copy of the original will?" I did. My father had given me one. I'd kept it in a folder in my filing cabinet because I'm the kind of person who keeps things in folders. Adrienne asked to see it. I brought it to her apartment that weekend. She went through both documents side by side, the original and the updated version, for about 20 minutes without saying much. Then she looked up and said, "These were drafted 8 months apart, supposedly. But this signature block here," she pointed to a clause in the original, "uses language that your father's attorney updated in his standard template sometime in the last year." "I know, because I used to use the same boilerplate." She stopped. Then she said, "The original was supposedly drafted first, but it has newer language than the update. I didn't fully understand what that meant at first." She explained it slowly. The document that Gerald Fitch was calling the update, the one that gave Devon everything, had been created using an older template. The document everyone was calling the original, my father's first intentions, used a more current template. It was backwards. Someone had created a fake updated will using an older version of a standard legal template, not realizing that the supposedly earlier document had newer language. In other words, the will Devon presented wasn't the update, it was a forgery. I sat on Adrienne's couch for a long time after that. I remember her refilling my water glass and not saying anything. There wasn't much to say. My brother had forged my father's will. He'd done it with the help of an attorney. He'd done it while I was grieving and not thinking clearly and inclined to believe the worst about myself. He'd done it and it had almost worked. I want to be honest about the next part because people always want to know why you didn't just go straight to the police. The answer is that I was terrified, not of Devon specifically, but of being wrong, of making an accusation against my own brother over my dead father's estate and being wrong, of becoming the hysterical younger sister who couldn't handle not getting what she thought she deserved. I needed to be sure. Adrienne connected me with the forensic document examiner, a woman who consulted for law firms and occasionally for federal investigations. Her name was Dr. Yount. She worked out of Philadelphia and she was expensive, and I used almost a third of my inheritance to pay for her analysis. She confirmed Adrienne's suspicion and went further. The ink on my father's signature in the updated will had been applied to paper that was newer than the date on the document. She identified a specific batch discrepancy in the paper stock. She also noted that the signature itself was consistent with my father's handwriting, but showed subtle indicators of slow drawing. The way a signature looks when someone is carefully copying rather than signing naturally. My father hadn't signed that document. Someone had traced or very carefully copied his signature. Devon had the original will in his possession for 2 weeks after the death while organizing Dad's paperwork. He'd had both the signature to copy and the motive to do it. I took everything to a real estate attorney in Pittsburgh. She referred me to a colleague who handled estate fraud. He listened to the whole story and then said, "You need to file a complaint with the state bar against Fitch, and you need to take the forensic report to the DA's office." I said, "What if they don't believe me?" He said, "The evidence is pretty hard to argue with." I filed the complaint. I went to the DA's office with a folder that contained Adrienne's initial analysis, Dr. Young's forensic report, the original will, and 14 months of emails between Devon and Jared Fitch that I'd requested through a legal discovery process I barely understood. My attorney walked me through every step. It took 7 months. 7 months of Devon calling me periodically to check in, asking how I was doing, acting like nothing had happened. I answered the calls. I kept my voice normal. I said I was doing fine, just keeping busy. I'd learned something from him, I suppose. How to keep your face still when your chest is full of something you're not ready to show. The investigators found what they needed: the paper stock, the email chain where Devon and Jared Fitch had discussed the revision, a wire transfer from Devon to an account connected to Fitch 3 weeks after my father's stroke, 2 years before the alleged update was created. They'd been planning this for a long time. Devon was charged with forgery, fraud, and conspiracy. Gerald Fitch surrendered his law license and entered a plea agreement in exchange for testimony. He got 18 months and a $200,000 fine. Devon went to trial. I didn't go to the courthouse every day. I went on the days that mattered. The day the forensic evidence was presented, the day the emails were read into the record, and the day the verdict was announced. Guilty on all counts. He got 5 years. He'll likely serve 3 with good behavior, and I've made my peace with that, more or less. Justice isn't always the number you want. Sometimes it's just the confirmation that you weren't wrong, that what happened to you was real, that someone looked at the evidence and agreed. I got my father's house back. It took another 8 months of civil proceedings after the criminal case closed, but the court voided the fraudulent will and ordered the estate distributed according to the original document. The rental property is mine now. It brings in $1,550 a month. They raised the rent in the 3 years Devon had it, and it's still the most stable thing in my financial life. The house I didn't keep. I couldn't. I drove down and walked through it once after the judgment, and every room felt like grief and anger layered on top of each other in a way I wasn't equipped to separate. I sold it to a family with 2 kids who I hope will fill it with noise and not know anything about what happened there. I put the money into a savings account, and I don't touch it often. My father's ceramic frog is on my porch now. I moved it when I emptied the house. It doesn't have a key under it, but I keep it there anyway. The thing nobody tells you about family betrayal is that the hardest part isn't the betrayal itself, it's the rewriting. Going back through every memory and asking yourself which ones were real. Every Christmas Devon drove down to see Dad, was he checking on his investment? Every time he was patient with me, called me difficult, gently suggested I wasn't handling things well. Was that strategy? When did my brother stop being my brother and start being someone who saw me as an obstacle? I don't have an answer to that. I'm not sure the question has one. What I know is this. My father loved me. He told me in words and he showed me in documents, and he was specific about the rental property because he knew exactly what I needed, and he made a plan to help me get it. Devon couldn't take that away. He tried, and he had 2 years and an attorney and my own grief working in his favor. And he still couldn't do it, because my father had handed me a folder with a copy of the original will, and I was the kind of person who kept things in folders. My dad knew me well enough to know that. I think about that more than I think about Devon. I think about my father deciding what to leave me and why, sitting at his kitchen table with his coffee, being specific, being intentional, thinking about my future in a way I wasn't capable of thinking about it myself at the time. That's the memory I go back to. Not the funeral, not the attorney's office, not the 7 months of keeping my voice normal on the phone with someone who had stolen from me. The kitchen table, the coffee, him looking at me and saying, "That'll give you a cushion while you get your feet under you." I have my feet under me now. It took a while, but I do. I keep my father's ceramic frog on my porch. It doesn't do anything. It just sits there, same as it always did on his porch, same as it did when I was small enough to think a frog shaped rock was a perfectly normal thing to have outside a front door. I moved it when I cleared a house, and I don't know exactly why, except that I needed something from that place that wasn't complicated. Devon made a calculation. That's the only way I can understand it now, 3 years later. Not as something monstrous that appeared out of nowhere, but as a decision someone made, slowly, over time. He looked at our father's life, and he looked at me, and he decided I was the easier obstacle. That I was the one who second guessed herself, who moved around, who didn't have her feet under her. He wasn't entirely wrong about who I was. He was just wrong about what I'd do when I finally understood what had happened. What I've come to believe is that the truth has a kind of weight to it. It doesn't move fast, it doesn't announce itself, but it accumulates. Every document my father kept, every copy he handed me, every conversation I had with Adrienne over a lunch I almost cancelled, all of it was weight on one side of a scale that Devon thought he'd already tipped in his favor. He hadn't. He'd just convinced himself he had. I think about the kind of person my father was. He was specific. He didn't say, I'll leave you something. He said the rental brings in about $1,400 a month, and that'll give you a cushion. That specificity wasn't an accident. It was the act of someone who understood that love without intention is just a feeling, and feelings don't hold up in probate court. My father was a good man, and he was also a smart one, and he raised me to keep things in folders even when I didn't know why I was keeping them. That folder saved my life. Not dramatically, not in the way movies mean it, but in the slow, practical way that matters. It gave me something to stand on when Devon wanted me to believe the ground had already shifted. I spent a long time being ashamed of how long it took me to see what he'd done. I thought I should have known sooner. I thought a smarter person would have caught it faster. But the thing about being deceived by someone you love is that the love is the mechanism. You explain things away because you cannot afford, emotionally, for them to be true. That's not weakness. That's just what trust costs you when it's betrayed. What I know now is that the way out isn't anger, though I had plenty of that. It isn't revenge, though the outcome looked like it from the outside. It's just doing the next right thing, and then the next one, and not stopping because it's hard or because you're scared of being wrong. I hired the forensic examiner when I was terrified. I filed a complaint when I didn't know if anyone would listen. I kept my voice, even on the phone with Devon for 7 months, because I had learned from him, actually, that sometimes you protect what you know by not showing it too soon. Devon is serving his sentence. Gerald Fitch lost everything that was supposed to matter to him professionally. And I have a rental property in Western Pennsylvania that brings in $1,550 a month, a folder I still haven't thrown away, and a ceramic frog that doesn't do anything except remind me that my father saw me clearly, even when I couldn't see myself. That's enough. Some days it's more than enough.